Hello, everyone, and welcome to Contact Lost, the Polish podcast about Polish and international competitive scene. Today, with me, I have a bunch of fantastic guests. But first, let me introduce my co-host, Joker.
Hi everyone.
And now, moving on to our guests. The first guest, you know him well. He's becoming a staple in our show. Please welcome Typhus.
Hello.
Good to have you. And last but not least, a new addition to our team, the Polish national team member from previous years, a very skilled and well-known Eldari player. A warm welcome for our friend Duda.
Dzień dobry.
Right, guys, we met today, or we're meeting today to talk about Eldari and how well they fare in the current meta. Everyone around us is doing episodes on either Space Marines or Necrons, but if I hear about those codexes one more time, I think I'm going to give up the hobby completely. So we've decided to do something else. So we are going to focus on the Space Elves, and we are going to look at the Craftworld Eldar, Drukhari, and Harlequins, and we're going to see what makes them tick, whether they are good, whether there are any competitive builds, should we mix them, etc., etc. But before we get there, I would like Duda to tell us something about himself. Duda, what is your competitive experience? How long have you been playing? What competitions have you participated in, and why do you play Eldar?
So I am competitive player for 7 years, I guess, something like this, and that's basically all of Polish tournaments I can participate. I take part, and I was also on 4 ETC tournaments and some of other European tournaments like Belgian or Winter Team Championships. So I'm trying to go where I can, and this year it's because of the virus. I'm a bit stopped, but I would like to go when the scene is open again. And I play Aeldari because I like their lore basically, and it's a kind of tricky army, so that's my style.
All right, so a little bit about your tournament experience. Do you prefer singles events or team events, and why?
I like both. Team because there matters only your skill, and there is no one you can blame or you can count on. But team tournaments is the kind of spirit you feel during the team tournaments. It's something totally different to the singles, so that's why I liked it too.
All right, so I understand that you aspire for the national team for next year WTC, if it happens.
If it happens, I would like to go there.
All right, okay, so we'll get back to that topic later. So let's start our analysis perhaps with the Craftworld Eldar. So something that you specialize in, so to say. But I think every one of us had at least played against that army, so we more or less know what it does. Recently, I've listened to, I don't know if you're familiar with Almost Pro Gaming. So a podcast in English about competitive scene. The host, Brady, usually analyzes previous tournaments that happened over the last month, for example, and then he makes a tier list for that particular month, which race is doing the best, which is doing the worst, some honorable mentions, and so on and so on. So last episode that he released, I think 4 days ago, he talked about his tier lists from A to, I think, D, A being the best ones, D being the worst ones, or that you shouldn't even play. And he did mention Craftworld Eldar, and he said, and I quote, "Every strategy that Eldar had going for them in 8th edition just kinda got nerfed into the ground this edition. Almost all defensive tools that they had were stripped away from them, and I feel their points weren't really adjusted to them. I feel they are really in a bad spot right now. End of quote. Duda, do you agree with that? Do you agree that they are in a bad spot right now?
Yes, I totally agree. They basically counted on minuses to hit, so this is now capped. And the other tactic, defensive tactic, Eldar count on was hanging in combat and locking in combat, which basically they were stripped of also this edition.
So what would you attribute their tough situation to? Is it the change of the core rules of the game? Is it the points? Is it, I don't know, terrain? What happened?
So basic rules changed, but nothing more. So they weren't adjusted to those rules. So if they stay the same and something else changes, it might happen, and it happened, that they are better or worse. In this case, they are worse.
All right, so can we discuss the army mechanics? Like what used to make Eldar strong? I mean, you've mentioned a couple of those. And if those things don't work anymore, what do you want to use now in your current builds? So what are the most, strongest aspects of those army? Of this army.
What were or what?
No,
are?
what are currently the strongest aspects of this army
at the moment?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's only they are very quick. They can move. They can stalk a lot of inches in one turn. That they are mobile, and that basically the thing that for me at the moment makes them playable, because they are not really tough. This is they have not at all. They have no firepower or any kind of harming your opponent in comparison to recent codexes. So only that they are mobile makes them viable at all.
So is speed really the only aspect that this army has? What about, psychic powers and so on? I remember people used to complain that this is the only army that has 2 psychic trees and so on, and that the powers are OP. So did that go away somewhere, or is it just not that strong anymore?
I think that it never be that strong. For me, the powers they possess, it's something you have to use to make them powerful. So it's like these units without powers, they are not so super.
Right, that's correct. Okay, Typhus, before we started recording, we exchanged a couple of words about Psychic Awakening. So did Eldar get anything interesting in Psychic Awakening that, possibly could make them work better?
So when we talk purely about Craftworld Eldar, they got pretty decent custom craft worlds. So when you would compare them against other codices, you can actually think about using some of the custom craft worlds. And maybe it's because their own craft worlds aren't that powerful, maybe especially now, for example, when you think about Eanden, that was pretty powerful back then. Was it Eanden with additional -1 to hit?
Alitok.
Alitok. And those were nerfed, but you still have some additional bonuses, like you still have like Master Artisans, Cover, etc., etc. So you can actually fill different units. And what I was actually talking with Duda a few days back, they got new psychic powers even. So if you do not feel like your army needs Smite, you can, for example, use your Farseer to make sure that your Warlocks have better casting of their powers. So I think like their Psychic Awakening wasn't like groundbreaking, but it surely gave them few options. So that, for example, Duda now uses in his roster a lot. Like his whole roster is basically based on the changes that were in the Psychic Awakening, and they made the roster more, maybe not viable, but more resilient to being unlucky. Because when you think about how Eldar played back in 8th, you still had like these insane Ynnari armies, but you could get really unlucky and you couldn't really do much about it. And that's one thing that, for example, Duda's list is doing good against, because he can actually control those luck factors and make sure that every crucial thing is going his way. Maybe not like everything, not bright lances and rolling damage on bright lances, but when it comes to failing psychic powers or quicken, he will always cast those, but only way he will not is if opponent actually has a way to deny or auto-deny, like Word Eaters or similar stratagems.
Okay, so the Eldar and Joker, a question to you, because recently you've been very successful with your like monster mash list, right? So Keepers of Secrets, but also like Magnus, additional mixture of Nurglings and Brimstones and Flamers and all that jazz. The Eldar have an inbuilt rule that I think they get rerolls against Slaanesh demons and so on. Would you
Yes.
fear playing the Eldari army right now, knowing that they have a bonus like that?
You know, it's tough to say. I'd have to play that matchup, I think, to see how much it actually means on the table. And what that bonus exactly is, because I also can't remember it off the top of my head.
Right.
It's a reroll, full reroll to hit in combat.
Yeah, and Harlequins have an option to also have reroll to wound.
Oh, Eldars also.
Right. So it sounds like something that could surprise your enemy, especially now that that Slaanesh army is quite potent, and you see it or hear about it quite a lot. So, I mean, I wanted to get into Harlequins later, but Typhus, have you had a chance, because I know that you're running a Harlequins army, have you had a chance to, for example, use that rule in any of the matchups?
Yeah, actually, I played one game against those demons. We've been actually talking about it with Duda today. I really didn't understand some of the rules. For example, I didn't differentiate the Halaxi or the special keeper from the normal keeper. But actually, I used this stratagem, but it's not that crucial. I mean, it's always nice for one command point to get rerolls to wound and rerolls to hit, and it makes every unit self-sufficient, essentially, against those armies. But it's not really that impactful, because in case of Harlequins, they get, rerolling to hit is cool, but you can get rerolls to wound anyway because of the Troop Masters. And there's also one thing that when there's minuses to hit or minuses to wound, those units actually do not hit that hard. So when I've charged the special keeper that has -1 to wound, I actually haven't dealt a single wound. I was pretty unlucky with my 5 Skyweavers with flat 3 damage on them, but I wouldn't say it's like really that impactful. It's nice. It's a useful stratagem in that certain pairing, but I wouldn't say it's game changing like it would be, for example, when you're playing demons against Grey Knights and you can just pay 2 command points to summon a new Keeper of Secrets. That's like nowhere near that power level.
Yeah, it's in the nice to have category, I would say.
Yeah, it might be useful sometimes. Like, when you play against Slaanesh obliterators, you will use that, but it's like really niche.
Yeah, it's situational. at best. All right, so let's move back to Craftworld Eldar because I don't want to wander too far away from them. Duda, what units work right now? What do you feel is worth using? What goes into your current build, for example?
So for me, an auto pick right now are warp spiders.
Interesting.
Yes, that's something for me, they should be in all kind of lists, at least 2 units, of course, depending on what points you play. But this is very fast infantry unit with deep strike, so you can easily do scramblers, you can easily do any actions that require it to be infantry without advancing, because when they move, they special move, they do not advance, so they can perform actions anyway. And they get basically -1 to hit. They are free up safe with cover when you have the special Craftworld. So they are very reliable. And this is the unit that you take because you want to score some points during the game. And other than warp spiders, I don't have some certain picks. I have my picks, which I like to use, but I'm not able to recommend them to everyone as an auto pick, because for me, they require some kind of play style and some kind of skills that someone might say that this is stupid or he don't understand it. So
yeah, but I think if you decide to play Craftworld right now, you're basically in that category where you're trying to figure out something that someone else hasn't figured out yet, or you're accepting the risk that whatever you're bringing to the table might not actually work. But if it does, it's going to be huge. So from that category, from like those units that work for you because you know how to use them, what else would you put in the list?
So I like to use Warlock Conceal on bikes, and I like to use them, and I think this is the best unit now that can kind of substitute for Shining Spears, which for me now Shining Spears are not very good. And I'm trying to use now, because I didn't play a lot of games with them, Riflords, because they are kind of tough, they are cheap, and they provide a bit of long-range anti-tank fire, which is always required when you play Eldari.
All right, so sounds like, at least with Wraith Lords, something completely different to 8th edition, where you probably wouldn't see them ever, or maybe in fluffy games.
Yes, because they basically now do not have the penalty for moving, which was kind of killing them right then. And with custom Craftworlds, you can make them reroll to hit and reroll to wound with 1 dice. And when they are always on cover, which is very hard to get with monster right now, I think even impossible, they are very tough, because 8 of toughness and save 2+ makes them kind of tough. When something hit them very hard, like laser destroyer or something, they are dead anyway. But for 140 points, they are fine.
All right, what will be the loadout? Like, what will they bring?
So I use them with 2 lances, because that's the best anti-tank option by now. They have 2 shuriken catapults to shoot some small fire at close range, and this is what is very, very good about them, which is not good about dreadnoughts. That when you bring them with 2 lances, they can strike in combat anyway, because they have 4 attacks with strength 7, -3, and flat 3 damage. So they have some threat in combat anyway, when dreadnought with 2 shooting weapons is no more a threat in combat.
Yeah, he doesn't have AP, he doesn't have that damage as well. All right, and coming back to Warlock Council, for those listeners who, I don't know, are considering playing Eldar, haven't played them yet, what's so special about the Warlock Council? Why would you pick that?
Because this is the only unit that can bring two runes of battle spells in one unit. So you can cast on them Focus Wheel, and they get +2 to casting. You can link them with Farseer, so they get another +1, so it's +3, and you can cast Protect and Quicken with +3 to casting with custom Craftworld Children of Prophecy, which makes once turn into 2 when Psychic Phase. So your minimal roll on Psychic Phase is 7, and you have basically no chance to fail those spells. And that's very important to Eldar army, because these are the very best spells in this codex that you can move again, and that you can get +1 to your saving throws. And basically this is, as I said, a unit to substitute for Shining Spears. They are maybe they fighting wars, but they are carrying spells with them, and they are more tough, so they can survive more attacks from your opponent. And this is the unit that do not kill, but they survive. That this is the way I play them, to make them survive, to make them threaten your opponent with locking in combat, with keeping them in deployment and such things. Not basically to kill, because the killing power is not so great.
So they're more of a utility unit then?
Yes, it's 600 points. So that's kind of one of 3.
Yeah.
That's a very big part of your roster, but I think they are great, because your opponent, if your opponent wants to kill them, he needs to put a great effort to this. And if your opponent do not kill them and leave them be, they can be really awful to him.
All right. So we have Warp Spiders, the Warlock Council, Wraith Lords.
These are the units I use right now. And I don't really get if there is much more units you can use that they are good in this codex right now.
Okay, but I guess the edition and the way this edition is played, it requires you to build a list to be able to score some secondaries and primary as well. So what units would you prefer to use to excel at scoring primaries and secondaries, and which secondaries would you choose?
So Warp Spiders again, because they can easily do scramblers, they can easily do quarters of the table. I don't know what's the name of the secondary.
Engage on all fronts.
Yep.
Engage on all fronts.
Or maybe if you play with not many objectives secured, you can maybe go for domination. And then I would play also Killing More, attrition, I guess it's named, because as I said, the list I play have few units that are tough, so you can easily manage to kill more than your opponent. And I use some of psychic secondaries like interrogation or ritual, depending on what opponent I play.
Okay, sounds interesting. Typhus, have you heard about any other lists for Eldar that work, or have you encountered any other lists that work? Or is what Duda is suggesting basically the go-to build right now?
I think like from the very beginning of the edition, there weren't many players who were looking into Eldar after they realized that previous solutions that were working aren't viable anymore. So having that in mind, I haven't seen that much going on in Poland. Actually, I think like Duda was actually only player that was supposed to attend the Polish team championships with a pure Eldar army. Duda can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not remember any other.
It's true. I'm only
So-
player that would use Aeldari.
In like
I mean,
from like
Craft.
80 players, he was the only Eldari player, and that's the problem, because maybe there are some lists. I've seen some Craftworlds used in other armies, like sometimes Harlequins using something from Craftworlds, but I haven't seen them have a lot of success. What I like though about the list that Duda is using is that when you usually construct a list, you think about choosing secondaries that are either, I don't know, line breaker, scramblers, maybe sometimes raise the banners high, but you usually in those lists only have 2 secondaries that are like clear cut from the beginning you make your list. And in his case, he can actually choose 3 secondaries that he can do by himself quite easily, which is quite good when you compare it to other armies that would, for example, have actually quite good missions to choose against him, because they can choose to kill Wraith Lords and the how do you call them? Crimson Hunter Exarchs guys. But actually, most of the armies need to play against an opponent who they can choose one of those missions that require killing characters or vehicles, etc. And when you are playing against, for example, completely against a list that is designed to not give you any secondary points from those, you actually are kind of wasting the 3rd secondary. So that's what I like about this roster. And I actually think when I was looking at this army that Duda is fielding, that it's not that bad when you look at the whole field. Of course, it cannot play against certain armies, and it hates playing against army that has scorned the sorcery, as Word Eaters do, that can deny them their most important spells. But they are still decent, and I do not think that's an army that will actually lose a lot. Because you can lose when you, for example, lose a roll-off and your whole Seer Council will die. I think Duda already had such cases, for example, playing against Admech. But I think that's actually a good list. And I know Duda was looking into like other units, like from Forge Ward, he's actually using the Forge Ward Wrath Seer, the Wrath Lord that is also a Spirit Seer. And he was looking into Hornets, but he didn't really like them. And I think that's the problem, because most of the units in Eldari Codex aren't actually viable, because you do not have really tough units. Maybe you have like Wrath Lords, Wrath Blades, but those really tough units usually do not kill. And when you compare those units to other armies that have, I don't know, Grotesques, maybe those aren't the best units to compare to, but when you look into, for example, compare the Wrath Blades or Wrath Lords against
Centurions,
Beasts of Nerl, etc., they are really weak in like one-to-one comparison. And that's the problem, because, and I think it's common, for example, in Harlequins as well, that you do not actually have like insane units. You need to have your whole army kind of working together for a common goal. And I think that's good, because I hated the 27 spears list back in 8th. But I think this army isn't like as easy as, for example, you would think the aggressors, salamanders that were previously in the previous codex used and had great success. I think this army is more finesse in style. And those armies aren't usually the ones that are looked upon from the very beginning of the edition. I think people are usually looking into armies that are pretty straightforward, and those more elaborate armies are actually resurfacing after like few months after the edition release or their codex release, somebody will finally find something. And I think for Duda it was easy because he was looking into Seer Council before, and I do not remember anyone playing Seer Council like across the globe. I do not remember any good scores from players playing this army.
Right, because I guess, as you said, the Eldari lists would usually comprise 27 spears or flyers, and those two builds seem to have disappeared completely. Like, what happened to all the planes?
So Duda is actually using planes, but those aren't like, those are more of a utility and unit that can actually do something when he goes first, kill something, or for example, block. And I haven't seen Duda play, but I would guess against certain armies he can combine them with Seer Council to block his opponent in deployment zone for like 1-2 turns, and basically gets enough points from the secondaries and primaries to not lose that game, even if he loses those units. So I think they're gone. They are more of a utility. No, we won't see another list that was 5 Eldar flyers, 3 Dark Eldar flyers, because those armies obviously suck at doing secondaries.
Yep, exactly.
And primaries, which is worse.
Yeah, primaries even. And what about, because recently I've heard, wasn't so long ago, I think, of an army that included night spinners, or another idea for a list with vibro cannons. So what about the night spinners? You know, no loss shooting sounds like an auto pick. So why not use that?
Because when you calculate the firepower, you come to result that they statistically kill, I don't know, 3 guardsmen.
Is it that bad?
Yes, it is, and they cost about 150 points. They are useless for me because I don't know how even someone can think that they are any kind competitive. You just calculate the output and you see that they cannot kill anything.
Okay.
And when you would like, for example, to use them to capture objectives, then why wouldn't you take a Wrath Lord or 2 Vipers for the same price?
Or Serpent, which is much more tough.
So yeah.
It seems the army has changed drastically since 8th then. Would you ever consider bringing what's the name, the Avatar of Ynnari, for example, mixed in with your Craftworld army? I see people doing that with Harlequins to a good effect. Would you ever consider mixing Ynnari with what you have in your list?
I don't see the place for them at my list, but that's always an option. So when I find a place for any of Ynnari units or any of Ynnari heroes, I think I could make it. I could put them in the list, but at the moment there is no place for them.
All right. Okay. So we've gone through the units. We've gone through the secondaries that you pick. Are there any interesting Craftworld choices? I mean, you've mentioned that Ally Talk, which you used to play in the previous edition, is no longer viable, or no longer that viable. And you've mentioned custom Craftworld. So do you go with those custom ones, or is there actually something in the codex that still works?
So the Craftworlds in codex didn't work for a long time yet by now. So when the custom Craftworlds came, it was good to have them. And in comparison to other doctrines, chapter tactics, and all this stuff, The Craftworlds from Codex weren't good at all, and what sometimes makes you pick certain chapter tactics, for example, it's dedicated stratagem, dedicated warlord trait, or dedicated relic, and in this case there is no such thing in Codex, so you have no reason to take any craftword from Codex that you can mix your own craftword, because you don't lose any stratagem, any relic that is any kind of useful. So for me, there is no reason to use stratagems, to use craftwords from Codex. You can use only the custom ones, and you will be good with it.
Okay. And whatever happened to Dark Reapers? I mean, at some point they were the bane of pretty much everything. They would mow through pretty much every single army on the table. Would you include them in your list?
What happened to Dark Reapers? They nerfed Ynnari like 2 years ago. That's all.
And they don't have a place in a list since then.
I don't think so.
But what was the
because
main factor that killed them? What, no double shooting, or
no double shooting, and they got also their points were risen, so that's the combo of nerfs makes them not any more useful for me, because they are still toughness 3 and save 3+ unit. So, and
Yeah.
if you want to make them any kind of viable, you need to spend some spells on them. So someone else then do not get the spells, and that's the basic problem.
And what's more, when you think about it, they do not contribute in terms of like holding objectives, pushing your opponents, and 3 Dark Reapers, if I'm not mistaken, are of similar point because the one Wrath Lord with Bright Lance. So of course they are better at shooting, but are they better at holding objectives and pushing your opponent and threatening in close combat? I don't think so. So maybe there is a place for like 3-man unit with no loss shooting on the Exarch, but I would say that's like the top of it. You wouldn't feel the whole squad of 10 men that you are used to using, especially now that you do not have as many command points as well. So you spending them on fire and fates, etc., might not be that great of an idea when you have limited pool for the whole game.
right? So yeah, really, you really make it sound like there is not a huge choice of units, and you really need to refine your list, and you really need to have the proper skill level to actually make that list work. So would you say that this army has potential? Because it sounded like we were discussing this army mainly in the singles context. What do you think about this army in terms of team competitive play? Do you think that Craftworld Eldar would have a place in a team composition going to the WTC, for example? Are they, for example, a counter to anything specific, or would you rather skip them in your choice?
So there are still a lot of options, and these options are very how to say, one-sided. So if you need to build very anti-tank army, you can make it with, I don't know, fire dragons, Rife Guard, and a lot of lances. If you need to make a very anti-horde army, you can put a lot of scatter lasers. So for me, if you would need to make an army that is pretty anti-something, I think you can master it, but it won't be that good that you can make from, for example, Space Marines, because these units, their data sheets, their profiles are still one of the oldest in the game by now, and you can see it, for example, when you look at Banshees, which is basically totally combat unit, and you compare it to, I don't know, Genestealer called Acolyte, you see that Banshee has 2 attacks on the base, and Genestealer Acolyte, which is, I don't know, 3 or 2 times less in points, has them 4 attacks. So you can see the difference between the old codex and the new codex.
Yeah, the codex didn't really age well.
Yes, so that's the point. So
and I think it's because that you can see in every codex going on that there's a huge power creep.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
and Eldars are one of the oldest right now. And
like for example, when you think like they changed multi-meltas now, what they could have done instead of increasing the damage and the number of shots, they could have just lowered the price. But no, we need to make units bigger, stronger, shootier, add more attacks to every Space Marine, add more wounds to every Space Marine, then increase the damage of every weapon, so it will essentially be the same. So yeah, there is power creep everywhere, and I think everyone notices it.
Right, but there is some saving grace in what you said, that you can, if you want to skew this army, if you want to basically make it anti-something, it still has its place. Like I remember a couple of months ago, but already in 9th, there was a tournament here in Tree City in the north of Poland, and I remember Elf, my good friend, he brought a list comprised of, I think, 9 knight models. So he had some like army Forge World ones, big knights as well. And he came to that tournament pretty confident because the list was doing quite well in tests. And then in that tournament, he played firstly against Vladi, and then the second game he played against Vuitrator, who is like our local Craftworld Eldar player. And Vuitrator came to the tournament with a completely anti-tank list, and he demolished Elf. Absolutely, like he destroyed those 9 knights and sent them to oblivion, which drove Elf so mad that he actually left the tournament without playing the 3rd game. So yeah, I think you can still build an Eldar army that can do its job. It's that probably it won't be able to win with everyone. But I guess you can say that about pretty much every single army that is in Space Marines right now.
Yes, that's it. So you can make it good against vehicles, but it will be awful against everything else.
Right. Okay. Any final thoughts on the Eldar? Anything that maybe we've forgotten and should be mentioned?
I think there's always one thing that, like list that Duda is playing, may not be as strong when you compare to Space Marines, but I think this army still has some tricks. And when you have a unit that is as mobile as Seer Council, you can actually catch your opponent unaware of what you are capable of doing. And this list actually can have pretty strong alpha strike against certain armies, because when you think, I think that one of the games that Duda played was against our like local Sisters player, and they came to conclusion that nearly every list of Sisters of Battle cannot play against Seer Council. Like Seer Council single-handedly kills the whole Sisters army, and there's no way to deal with it. And I think Duda is negative about this army, and I can understand why, because he has less choices in his whole codex than Space Marines in elite slot, so he can be mad about it. But I think there's still some place for this army, even though it's not as strong. When you think about like 8-man teams, maybe this army won't be like 4th choice, 5th choice. But when you think about like 7th, 8th army, and you can think about army that's not so obvious, and we've talked about in previous podcasts, so that when opponents need to playtest against certain army that's really niche, you can actually leverage that because they won't be able to know everything about what's going on. But in case maybe they're seeing that we'll have like 2 codices per month, I expect Eldar to have a new codex by the next WTC. But still, I think there's still some space for this army, but you can feel that they are older than other armies.
Yeah, I'm completely heartbroken about the fact, because I used to play Eldar and I used to play quite a lot of them in 8th, and as I said, I'm just heartbroken to hear when someone says that Eldar are now a niche army. That's, if you told me that, you know, or if you had told me that a year ago, I would have probably laughed in your face that, you know, this is going to be the future for the army. But this is where we are. I think the most important part is for anyone who's playing Eldar right now, adjust to your local meta as well. Like, don't get, you know, international tournaments and international metas get to you, because in your local meta, your army might still be the shit, so to say. It could be the army that wins you games, depending on what other players you have, what skill level they have, and so on. So I know from experience that the best players are the ones who stick to their armies and make them work. I'm not one of them because I change armies very often. But the people who stick to it, like we have a Craftworld player in Gdańsk, Lis, who at the beginning he was, I mean, he started playing and he wanted to play Ynnari, but it wasn't really his, you know, cup of tea. So he swapped and started playing Wraith Blades in Serpents. And everyone at the beginning was like, dude, that's not competitive. We're not going to get anywhere with that. But recently, especially now in 9th, he's been going to tournaments, like smaller points, but still. And regularly he was in the top. For the last 2 tournaments that took place, I think he came in first. So yeah, you can do anything with any army, I guess. And don't get discouraged by the fact that they don't win huge tournaments, because they can win in your local meta. I guess that would be the closing comment from me about the Eldar, Craftworld Eldar, at least.
That was deep.
Yeah, I think so. That, you know, it's very easy to jump on that bandwagon that, you know, oh, no one plays that, I'm not going to play that, I need to switch my army and so on. I do that all the time, so I know. So it's very easy to do that, and I don't want people to get discouraged, because I want to see more variety on the tables. I want to see Eldar on the tables, because it's a fantastic army. They do deserve new models. They do deserve a new book and new rules. But still, for the players who own them, don't shy away and bring them to tournaments. That's my recommendation. All right, so those were the Craftworld Eldar. Let's move on to Drukhari. So I don't think anyone here plays Drukhari actively. I used to play them a lot as well. But I know that, especially Tyfus, you as the selector of the Polish national team, you've been speaking warmly of the Drukhari. I remember our first episode when we were talking about competitive play. You said you've mentioned Drukhari as one of those armies that haven't really been hurt much by the new rules and the new game style. So maybe let's start with you. Is that correct? Is the Drukhari army faring well in 9th edition? Is their army composition fitting for the new play style and the way you score secondaries and primaries?
Yeah, I think it is. Let me get this straight from the very beginning. It's not an army that will win single tournaments. It's an army that will very rarely lose by a huge margin. So when it comes to team tournaments, they are a solid pick, because you know that when you put it against certain armies, they will just give you points. I think that's the same case with Custodes right now when people are thinking about them, but Drukhari as well have Agents of Vect, which is still a pretty good stratagem, even though you cannot reroll whether it worked or didn't. But this army was actually based around having midfield for itself for a long time. So it will still benefit from those missions. Maybe it will not be as good in making like scramblers because they do not really. They can always pay command points to put a wrack in opponent's deployment zone, etc. But they are still a good army that's just solid. It's nothing when it's not comparable to like damage output of new marines, etc. But we have actually talked about it with Duda before. It's like grotesques at the very beginning were like insanely tough. Like you could barely find an army that would kill them. Nowadays, it's much easier, but I think it's still an army that will be a good choice for a team tournament because, for example, when you are gonna play a horde army, let it be like 120 boys, or those horde tyrannies that were arising in Australia or Caillou was playing in Germany, you are still a good army against those armies, and they never want to play against you because you will just kill them in the midfield with your units and easily secure a high point win against those horde armies. So it's a great army when it comes to a team tournament. I wouldn't say they are like the best for singles. You'll still get like a decent result at singles as long as you are a better player, but it's not an army that will get you a top 3 or top 5 on a single tournament when you think about like 50-man tournaments.
Right. I also think they suffered. I mean, of course, the armies that you play against now. So Marines, probably Necrons, although I don't know how many games Drukhari players have played against the new Necrons. Probably not many. But
And then more Marines.
And then more Marines, yeah. Was one thing, but then I think completely out of nowhere came the points increases for the Ravagers, for example. I mean, I used to field 3. I think everyone used to field 3 with an Archon with Rid of the Living Muse for rerolls. I remember the times when they used to cost, what, like 135 points? I checked yesterday or 2 days ago, they're like 160 or 165 now. So
yeah, it's a 10 points increase per disintegrator, so it's 165.
Yeah, it's mental. You still get. I mean, it's a strong weapon. 9 shots per unit. Okay, but on a piece of wood, literally. Like this boat goes down so easily. It's unbelievable.
In close combat, especially, which armies are quicker and more tailored to quickly engaging.
Yeah, so you need to invest a lot, not only in points, but also like in screening and so on to make them work. And they have great range and so on, but they were so hurt by that point increase, like across the field, that this is probably what made them complicated to build now.
And I would say there's even more when it comes to building Drukhari. They were playing grotesques for like all those years since the codex release. Maybe there was some Talai played for some time, but they still were pretty same list. And I think people probably got bored of them. I wouldn't be surprised that there's still only few units that were playable. And when you look at those point increases, units that weren't playable got points increases as well that are like absurd at times. When you look at witches are now 11 points per model, toughness 3 and invulnerable in close combat. Like why?
Single wound. Yep.
Yes, like why? And for example, racks got increased from I think they were 9 points.
9
now
to
they are
12.
9 to 12, and everything went up. Like Talai are like now 120 or 130 per model. Grotesques are 10 points up per model, so instead of 35, it's 45. So everything was increased a lot. And there's like nothing to look into, because when you want to play like blob of 20 witches, why would you field a blob of 20 witches when, for example, in demons can field 30 demonettes, which are just better because they always have the invulnerable save.
And they fight first.
Yes. And when you compare them to demonettes, or of course you can lock someone in combat with the shard nets, etc. But there's like no reason to actually, from my opinion, to explore something different. I mean, I'm trying to enforce myself to think flocks will be good, but for example, Duda thinks I'm just dreaming, and they will actually result in being mediocre. But there's not much to look into, and I think that's the problem with this army. It's what we said at the very beginning, that there was a huge increase in damage output. And when this army was for a long time the most resilient one in the whole game, they aren't right now. So yeah, I mean,
So they also stayed the same, and the other things changed. So
yeah,
they
like
they are basically the same, and other things went up. So they are worse right now in comparison to the rest.
they lost command points, which they cannot reroll Vect, and when other armies got actually buffed by Psychic Awakening, like their Psychic Awakening was just a pure joke. Like you could get a shooting buff on Covens, but you would need to lose 4+ invul, or etc. etc. So like there was literally no reason to use custom cabals or custom covens. Only witch codes. You could argue that some witch codes are actually good because you wouldn't lose like a crucial stratagem by changing a witch code. But like they got no traits, no new stratagems, and their custom covens, etc. were dog shit. So yeah.
Yeah, so when the original codex came out, and at that time, you know, I was already collecting, or I had been collecting Drukhari for a longer while, and when the codex dropped, I was ecstatic. The codex, to me, the Drukhari codex was one of the best codices that came out in 8th edition. One, because it was strong, and two, because it was probably the fluffiest of the ones that came out. Like, you know, the whole concept of like using all three parts of the army and getting benefits from it and so on, that was absolutely marvelous. But then when you think about it, I think GW has made this mistake originally with making one Cabal and one Coven to rule them all. Because you had the Cabal of the Black Heart, really, maybe Flayed Skull could compete with it, but hardly ever did. And there was simply no better thing than Prophets of Flesh. Simply, yeah, by a long shot, nothing better. 4+ invuln across the army. You cannot beat that with anything. So they've set the bar very high for themselves, and then Psychic Awakening was a big letdown because they weren't able to offer anything that would beat that. And that's sad because the army deserves to have variety because it can offer variety, but they've actually set the bar so high at the beginning that any releases later just weren't on par with that. So yeah, and this is saddening. I hope that, you know, they come up with as fluffy rules and as immersive and competitive rules at the same time with a new codex, because right now I stopped playing the army because, as you said, I got bored. How many times can you field Grotesques, Talos, and Ravagers? It just, you know, the formula just expires after a while, I guess. So yeah, I'm not surprised to see that the amount of Drukhari players dropped. Souping Eldari armies now doesn't work that well either. So playing mono Drukhari is for the most resilient players out there, I guess. Ah, yeah, end of rant.
What can we say? That's true.
Does this army play the secondaries well?
Yeah, I think so. Like, maybe not like insanely well, but you have no psychers, so you can actually benefit from the killed psychers.
Yeah.
Upward the wage, I think it is. You still are pretty resilient, so you can, for example, play domination as your main secondary, or play domination and the scramblers, and third, you do not really have like a clear-cut third choice. So it's a decent army, like I said. A lot of armies currently are only banking on doing 2 secondaries and doing some kind of third, depending on the opponent. But this army, as I said, it's good. It always was played as an army that was staying on objectives and killing its opponents when they came close to the objectives. And that hasn't changed, and that's the point of the game now. Maybe that's why they raised the point so much. But still, as we ranted about for a long time, the idea stayed the same, and there was no reason to actually look into other unions in this codex. So let's just hope they will release one soon, or change the points in a way that you could have any kind of reason to actually feel something different.
Yep. One last question about the army, because and this is again from the like competitive team tournament perspective. I remember that I think 2 years in a row, when the Polish national team went to the ETC and to the WTC, that was the Winter Team Championships. If Shizi, who was the main Polish Drukhari player, was going, he would probably be the player who was, offered to the enemies first as the first pairing, just because this army was so stable. It could take on anyone. Shizi, surprisingly, would probably usually bring a lot of points to everyone's surprise, because he had his play style and skill. But this was the army that you would throw at the opponent, and they had to deal with it. Is that army still there? Is that army still the army that you would put out there for the other team to pair something to it? Or
I would let me interrupt you. First of all, it wasn't an army that could play everything. So it was still an army that wouldn't be put forward as a second defender, first defender. It was usually paired later because it could play with a lot of lists. But it had its counters. Like for a while, it was Tau or Imperial Knights. They just couldn't play against those armies. And right now, I do not think we have enough evidence and playtests to actually know how this army will fare. And all we have are our speculations and some small results from like not the top players, at least from Polish scene. And I think it won't change, because when I was talking with like our Dark Eldar players, they weren't really keen on playing this army that much. It's, as we said, it's still the same. So I think it will be good for team tournaments anyway, because it will be a stable army. But yeah.
Nothing too crazy.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So I guess we can close the topic of Drukhari with that as a summary. Let's move on to something that I think you will be more passionate about, Typhus. So the Harlies. You've been talking about them since the first episode, which was, I don't know, 8 weeks ago. So has that passion about the army changed since then, or have you gotten to play more? And is the passion even stronger now? How How are you doing with your list?
So
army?
I've gotten to play at all.
Which is good.
That's first. But I'm kind of disappointed because everyone is playing this army and it has good results, and I wanted to play something niche. Like
Unique,
Duda is
yeah.
playing Craftworld Eldar right now, and I am annoyed by that because I will need to find something completely different within this army combined with Drukhari. So I won't play the same shit that everyone is playing. So that's my part of the rant about the army. But yeah, I think it's good. I think it got improved a lot by the new edition, and it's like a combination of few things. First of all, more dense terrains and armies relying on having self-sufficient units is beneficial for Harleys because every unit in this army can be boosted by command points to actually kill something unit by themselves. And they are pretty mobile. What actually Duda said earlier, like you are really mobile. You have a lot of redeployments, and that's great because you can actually move like your whole army through the board in one turn if you think about it. So that's actually really good. And that's one thing. And second thing, I think that changed a lot is that as you get points throughout the game, this army is pretty fragile. So you're losing a lot of models throughout the game. And opponents are also playing more aggressively because they need to actually get on those objectives, etc. That's why people are fielding so many fusion pistols, because you can actually get to shoot with them. Because opponent is pushing to you, so you can actually get a chance to shoot with all those units, and that's why everyone is playing Soaring Spite as their mask. And I think it's like a combination of many things, but I think their initial results are kind of skewed in that sense that most people around the world played armies that were weak against Harlequins. And people were playing like Marines, Vehicle Marines, or Custodies, etc. Armies that are high wounds, high toughness, sometimes invulnerable save. But those armies just die to high AP, high damage weapons. And I think that after like seeing more games with this army, I think it's not as good as people thought. It's a really good army. Don't get me wrong. It's just you do not when you think about like team tournaments, you would have like a grotesque army that we just mentioned. Harleys cannot really play against that. They can, but they won't win because they cannot push grotesque from the objectives. Because Harlequins do not have any unit that will survive fighting with grotesques. Like Harlequins do not have any resilient unit. And for example, when we would think about playing against the Seer Council that we just mentioned, Harlequins, if they didn't go first against Seer Council, they just die. It's just like that. You have no way. You just get wiped in like 2 turns because their Alpha Strike is perfect for your stat line. And Harlequins, for example, cannot really play against Horde armies. You would need to field specific, like a lot of Frozen Stars units, and actually field some screens from other armies like Guardians, Razor Wing Flocks, etc. to actually get a chance to countercharge your opponents. So I think their initial success was purely based on the metagame from the very beginning. When you look at like foreign tournaments, it was like
factor.
Yeah, it's a really tricky army. But when you see those tricks for the first time, it's not really that surprising later. Like there are a lot of combat tricks, fallback tricks, etc. But those aren't on such power level like double shooting your aggressors for 12 shots each. Like it's not the same power level. It's more a tricky army. And I think it has its place in the meta game, but I would expect that the less people will play Marines, which are like the perfect pairing for Harlequins, the worse their performance will be on like international level. It will be still an insane army for team tournaments, because you make sure that opponents' vehicle armies cannot just, they will just die. Or like some foot marines armies will just die as well. So there's a place for it, but armies that aren't, that are completely awful pairings for Harlequins aren't really played right now and weren't played in the beginning. Well, I think when it comes to more people getting into orcs, needs, or other hordes like 400 garments that people were thinking about, then it will be a problem. Because this army has no way to deal with those armies.
So today I've seen in Gloria Victis, the Polish forum for Warhammer 40k competitive and everything else around it, I've seen Carol or Problem post a list that is, I think, a mixture of Harlies and Drukhari. So it's a mixture of, there are like, what, over 20 players, there are 8 grotesques and so on, but no vehicles, no Skyweavers. So does the Harlequin army stand a chance against, you know, shooty enemies without their vehicles?
I mean, yes, on a decent table, yes. And that's I'm gonna play a little bit of such an army, but I do not think like grotesques are actually a good unit for Harleys, because you do not actually need a unit like grotesques. You need cheap expendable units, so you can actually leverage the damage output of your, for example, Frozen Stars units. So that's why I will be playing, when we'll get to play, God knows when, I will be playing the Razorwing Flocks with Frozen Stars Harleys, just to not play with the meta. And that army, I think it nicely connects with what Duda said earlier, that you can build Eldari to be good anti-infantry or anti-vehicle army. And same applies to Harlequins. Just when you want to have like anti-infantry army from Harlequins, you actually need to also take some kind of units from Drukhari or Craftworld Eldar, because you actually need to have a screen or something like that from those armies.
Okay. You've said that many people, or the majority of people that play this army, they take a lot of fusion pistols. But another staple in those armies are Skyweavers. That, you know, I see armies where there are 10 of them, but I also see armies where there are 15 of them. Would you say that, you know, without the possibility of mixing up with Craftworld Eldar and casting Doom on something, that, and then, you know, using Skyweavers with reroll wounds.
You cannot do that, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I meant. You cannot do that anymore. Are Skyweavers still a viable anti-tank choice, or is their field role something else, and the Haywire is just a nice addition to have?
From my games, it's still good. Don't get me wrong. Like shooting 5-star Skyweavers and getting like 9 wounds on the Rhino or something like that is still insane, because you can actually then kill the Rhino with like 2-star Weavers with shooting from shuriken cannons or something like that. So it's great. But what I think in those lists that are playing with Soaring Spite transports, Skyweavers are actually a unit that is the most mobile unit in the army, that you can, for example, send to kill opponents' troops in their deployment zone. When you use the movement instead of consolidation stratagem, they move 16 inches, so you can actually move 16 inches, then activate second round of close combat and for engage like whole shooty army with those 5 models. Maybe I'm over exaggerating a bit, but there are tricks, and I think that unit is also important when you play. For example, when I played against Slaanesh demons, they were important because every high wire cannon is a blast weapon. So,
right, which is easy to forget.
So 5-man squad is still 30 shots against like demonettes. And when your other shooty weapons are few shuriken cannons and melta pistols, you kinda need that. So it's a good unit. I think it has a. I would still not play more than 3 units because their footprint is insane, and trying to hide more than 2 squads, even on very dense terrain, is really hard to do. So, and I find them more of a utility unit that you can actually kill a vehicle, then kill the unit that was inside the vehicle, then use pay 2 command points to hide behind the wall somewhere, something like that. That's more of a utility unit that is really mobile and can kill something on the edge of the table when you use the Twilight Pathways psychic power from your Shadow Seer.
Right. And when we think about masks, what I see all across the internet are just 2. So either Soaring Spite or Frozen Stars. Does that mean that the other masks don't make the cut, or are those 2 just exceptionally good?
Well, first of all, Soaring Spite is the only way to make fusion pistols work. So if you want to play fusion pistols, you need to use Soaring Spite to leverage the mobility to get into that range. But Frozen Stars are an obvious choice because then you get actually 5 attacks from a Harlequin, which with certain weapons, if you buy on them, they are pretty good. So actually a 5-man squad under the stratagem that gives them +1 to damage can kill like a whole unit of primaries, marines, etc. So they are good. The problem with other masks is that they were good for their stratagems. Like you had, I don't recall the names, but there was one mask, I think Midnight Sorrow, that was great with solitaires because when solitaire would die, he would strike once again, etc., etc. So you had like every other mask was useful for characters in some way, or you were using the other mask. I don't remember the name. They had a rule called Somber Sentinels, and that rule means that they shoot or fight after dying. And that one was, for example, played in those 18 Skyweavers list back in 8 as a way to kill more vehicle armies. But right now you need mobility, and when you have, and you either invest into mobility by choosing Soaring Spite and build your army around that, or you choose more damage in close combat and you choose Frozen Stars. And Frozen Stars are the only way for this army to actually be able to handle horde armies. So, as I said, you need to choose. You either play Meltagans, play Frozen Stars, or you mix both of them and do not have enough command points. So,
yeah, tough choice. Okay, all right. So,
well, for me, Midnight Sorrow is also kind of, you can think about it because you get 6-inch consolidation, so you can a bit better penetrate your opponent. So if you count on tricking your opponent, blocking it, taking your opponent into combat, you can think about Midnight Sorrow. But that's the kind of, if you're more tricky, then you want to kill more, this is the reason you could take the Midnight Sorrow.
Yeah, we spoke with Duda about it. My main problem is that from my games, when I look at it, everything kills those players. Like every unit is,
yeah.
They are really fragile if someone attacks them. They are great if they hit and just disappear by using their stratagems, etc. But whenever you cannot hide them after their attack, they are dead. They are just dead. So it's still a 19 to 25 points per 1 wound on toughness 3 and 4+ invul. So they're essentially a glass cannon. So even though I was thinking about it, when I played against certain armies and I found out that 2 Primaris Marines that survived my charge can actually win the close combat against the 5-man squad, I was pretty disappointed.
Yeah, but I think this also boils down to the change in the rules in the 9th edition, where when you charge and you don't kill, you get punished for that a lot, because I guess there is a change to the fighting phase, right? That you don't get to fight first with your units in your own turn, or maybe I'm mixing up something now.
No, actually, when you charge with 1 unit, it's better because you get to strike
your opponent's
first.
turn, you strike first.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
unless you get charged, then you always die. But
yeah. Okay. Does this army benefit a lot from the fact that the games are shorter now? Meaning you only play 5 turns. Does that help Harlequins?
I think not. I think if there was actually a 6th turn, from the games I've played, I usually got to kill a lot of my opponent by like turn 3 or 4, and by that point I could actually safely get primaries. And if there was another turn, I think this army would benefit a little bit more, because usually when you're losing, you're really losing. Like, this army doesn't forgive you for making small mistakes. So I think what benefited it more is not the shorter game length, it's the shorter tables as well. So when everything gets,
yeah.
Yeah, because everything is short distance in this army. Like, the longest range of your shooting, I think it's 24. I do not think prismatic lances on Void Weavers have 36. I think it's 24. So you do not have anything with range more than 24. So you need to be mobile, you need to strike quick. And small tables and making your opponents move closer to you and not just shoot you to death was the biggest change for this army to actually work.
And how about playing the secondary game? Are they? I mean, do they do that well?
Yeah, there's always scramblers that you easily do because you have redeploys for command point, so you can essentially do it for having like 1 Harlequin staying alive after death of its transport can actually do the mission in 3 turns, essentially. So it's easy for this army to do scramblers. And I think that's not that popular, but what I'm usually playing from the first table of the secondaries, I do not remember the names, the one with domination or raise your banners high, I'm usually playing Linebreaker, because this army is really easily getting like 1 unit with the transport into opponent's deployment zone. And you actually, when you compare it to, for example, the mission, the table quarters mission, you need 4 turns of unit in each of the quarters to get 12 points. If you fail at some point, which you usually do, you probably end up having like 10, 11 points from those missions. And when it comes to Linebreaker, when I chose this mission, I actually every time got full 15 points, because for this army, it's really easy to have 2 units in opponent's deployment zone. So, but there is also a problem that you do not have a good choice for the third mission, because you can try Psychic Ritual, but this army doesn't survive on objectives, so you cannot really do that. You can try psychic interrogation, but you have only one psyker usually in your lists.
And you need those spells as well.
Yes, maybe you need them for the first 2 turns, from my experience. Later Shadow Seer is expendable, but you usually need to get something from your opponent's list to kill to get a decent amount of points. So if opponent doesn't have demons, like greater demons, monsters, vehicles, characters, because this army is actually pretty good at sniping characters as well, then you do not really have a way to get a good third mission.
Okay. Any final thoughts on the Harlequins? Because I think we covered the majority that was there to say about them. Can we move on to Ynnari?
I do not have anything more to say.
Right. So Ynnari probably is not gonna take a lot of time because they are just not in a good spot in general. But I do see the Incarn getting some play, included in multiple lists, especially mixed in with the Harlequins. So again, Typhus, Typhus, would you consider including the Incarn in your list? And if yes, why?
Well, I would include it in nearly every one of my lists, but maybe not from the competitive standpoint per se, but from the fact that I really love the rules. I find it fun, and you can catch your opponents on wrong sequencing of shooting or close combat and make their lives miserable, and I find it fun. But I think Incarn in the Harlequin army it's not a unit that will actually kill that much. I find it the best objective grabber in this list. And it's that because usually opponents will send a unit to kill, for example, a troop on an objective, and then you will just summon Incarn, and if there was no one close to that objective by the point you summoned him, he would score your primaries. So when I was thinking about him, he's not really good at killing. You either choose him to get some mobility, to kill some units on some objectives by some point, but in the Harlequin armies, it's more like, do you want Incarn or 5 Skyweavers? And I'm not surprised if people would choose Skyweavers. Mm-hmm. And the other use of Incarn is that I was thinking about using him with Razoring Flocks when it comes to Ynnari, because Ynnari, those ravenous birds are also Ynnari for some reason, and Eldari, so they can heal your Avatar of Death if they die, so that's cool. But I was thinking about using them because it's like the cheapest unit that you can get that has a lot of wounds and that can actually screen your Harlequins. And if you combine it with Incarn, then you get like invulnerable, safe, feel no pain. Of course, you need to cast your power, which will fail more. Like, you'll cast it usually, but if you fail it, sometimes the opponent will just kill all of your flocks. So I will need to playtest it more, but yeah, I think it's a good addition. It's probably, I think, after some time, it won't be chosen in many armies after all.
Right. And Duda, maybe a question to you, because I remember you used to play Ynnari in 8th edition back when they had their old rule set. Then at some point they got hit by the nerf bat pretty strongly, in that the rules changed completely and soul bursting basically disappeared, or well, the meaning of soul bursting changed. When I started talking about Ynnari, I made the assumption, I said they are in a bad spot, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are not. So what do you think? Where is Ynnari right now? Is it only about the characters, or are the rules actually maybe half decent?
So they basically lose all the other rules to get their rule, and that is why they are in the bad spot. Because if you want to put some units in combat, and there are units that could benefit from soul burst right now, but you lose your quicken, you lose your means to move quicker, because you lose all the rules that can that are basic to Craftworld or Drukhari, etc. So you get the combat buff, but you get no means to put your unit in combat. So that is why they don't play. The same you can say about, I don't know, Black Templars. This is the combat army with no means to put your units in combat, so that they are basically bad. That's all.
All right. So hopefully in the future, G-Dubs gives them some love and makes them a playable army again. Maybe not as playable as they used to be in 8th, because at some point they were winning absolutely everything. But again, for me as an elf lover, I would love to see Ynnari back on the tables, at least in top 5 for tournaments. Okay, so let's leave the Eldari then. And I have just a couple of like closing questions. One of them I think has already been asked, but I would like to ask both of our guests that question again. Do you both aspire for the national team? I'll start with Typhus. You're the selector. You get to choose. You get to observe the players. You get to choose. You get to play test. Do you want to be on the national team yourself?
So, yes and no. The question, like the answer for me is that if I will enjoy the game, I will think about playing, but knowing that there's a lot of Harlequin players in Poland right now, I won't be forcing myself to get into the team. And I will be glad if there will be someone better at this army than me. And when it comes to playing, that's all. It's like, if there will be no one and I will actually enjoy the game, then fine, but I do not have any kind of personal pressure to represent the team anymore.
Okay. Duda, how about you?
I would love to go, but I don't think that I would make everything to do this. So I would stick to Craftworld, and if they are not good enough to be considered into the team, I will just drop, I think.
Okay. Do you reckon the selection process this year will be much different to the previous years, taking all the COVID restrictions in Poland? We have pretty much all the restrictions are back, comparable to the times back in April, probably.
Or even more.
Yeah, or even more. So is it going to be tough for yourself, Kupcho, Vladi, to actually select a team?
So yeah, I think like the worst part would be not being able to play against certain people. You can always play on like tabletop simulator, but that's not the same thing as playing face to face and talking with someone. So I think that will be the biggest challenge. Other than that, I think like right now we are more in the scouting process. So I think it will be like that for next 3-4 months before we get into the nitty-gritty. And hopefully world will get back to at least some resemblance of normality back then. So right now it will be difficult because we cannot play with each other that much. We can play a little bit in our cities, but I guess it will not be for long. So, and I think like local game stores might close as well soon. So I think it will be a moment where we will need to just be very vocal on forums and share our thoughts a lot, what we think about certain armies and pairings.
Playing
Okay.
around in basements.
Or
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah,
Or-
if someone actually has a table and terrains.
Yeah, that's actually what it's all going to boil down to, I guess. So, gentlemen, I think we've covered the majority of the topics that at least I wanted this episode to cover. But maybe one last question from me. First, Duda, do you have any advice for Eldari players? Anything that you think people could benefit from? Any hint that you could give Eldari players right now in those difficult times dominated by Space Marines?
So I think that if someone chosen Eldars, Craftworlds, he likes their playstyle. So if you already like their playstyle, and you chosen them, just look for the tricks. Because on the codex level, on datasheets level, you won't get very good, but there are some tricks, there are some plays that can make you better. That's all. Just look for something that's not so obvious.
Okay, cool. Typhus?
Well, when it comes to Harleys, I think like there's not even much to talk about this army. You have like 9 entries, including the webway gate, and I do not think that's an army that you can actually think a lot about building. One advice I would have is to not limit yourself to those troops, transports, and Skyweavers. I would suggest looking around, maybe something from Dark Eldar or Craftworld Eldar will actually be beneficial for you. And do not close yourself to one build, because everyone everywhere will be playing Soaring Spite. Someone will play sometimes Frozen Stars, but if you look for like a longer time achievements, you need to play something tricky, as well as Duda said.
Joker, after listening to all this, do you think you have any piece of advice?
No, I think I'll just leave it the experts like I have for the past 1.5 hours.
All right. Okay, we can do it like that. And yeah, I guess my final piece of advice, I'll just repeat what I said earlier. Don't get discouraged by the fact that the army is not top of the meta right now. So the meta changes rapidly, and the time of the Eldari will probably come very soon. And for the time being, if you get the opportunity, just practice, play, experiment. Feel free to.
That's
Yeah.
the universal truth.
Yeah, but it's as you said, you cannot go wrong with this one. Play test. This is the right time now, because not many competitions are happening and so on. This is the right time to experiment. This is the right time to take the army and have fun. And maybe while having fun, you'll find something that no one else had figured out yet. So I strongly encourage everyone who listens to do just that. Just play, have fun, and experiment with the things that you normally wouldn't take, because maybe there is something in it.
Yeah, we've got a cliche we can close off.
Exactly. All right, guys, I think that's it. So thank you very much for participation. It was great to have you on. Very insightful as usual. Duda, Typhus, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.